Alright, we're back with more NBA coverage, and in this one, I'll be covering all the NBA action that I've watched over the past couple of weeks. And to get straight into it, the Pistons and the Knicks, a couple of Mondays ago. Dude, oh my gosh. We know that the Pistons, throughout the entire season, have done a great job in transition. That's by design, with just how youthful and athletic a good portion of their core players are in their defensive prowess. They want to have that advantage, in the fast break and give themselves easy scoring opportunities against defenses that aren't particularly in position at all. The rate of which they were able to get those kinds of looks in this game was absolutely ridiculous, because the Knicks, as they'll also have to experience in another game that I watched, it's like, man, they have thrown out a graphic stating that essentially, since New Year's Eve, the defense for this Knicks team has been on a complete and total nosedive. And I'm thinking to myself, throughout the entire time watching this, it's like, damn, is this the mark of a championship caliber team? Now, it wasn't all bad for the Knicks. It was much closer in the first half. But even at those points of time, you felt as though the Pistons were trying to chip away and create as much distance as possible. They were doing everything they needed to do on their end, because their shooting splits at that point were astronomically high. Not to mention that they were really relying on Cade Cunningham. And it's not surprising to say that, but at the same time, it was almost like he was just getting anything he wanted. They were throwing a number of different defenders on him. They even decided that, hey, we're going to have the rookie Kevin McCollum Jr. from Kansas guard the man on a few possessions. That ended up being a terrible mistake. He sliced him up on a couple of those occasions to get some free buckets as well. And after a while, they started to naturally give him more attention, creating a bit of collapse and opening up opportunities for other players to go and get their work done throughout the night. You got a ton of different Pistons players contributing here. And even though the numbers won't show it, again, when you look at the shot distribution, it was great. Everybody, damn near everybody, was being put in a great position to convert an easy shot. Like, you had Jaden Ivey, for example, benefit from it immensely in one of the first few games he'd been back from injury in that point. And man, they were glad to have his ass back in this game. Like, he honestly had not lost much of a step. There were still cases where he would just blitz his way to the basket using his world-class speed that he came out of the draft with and was advertised to have had at that point in time. Then you also had Isaiah Stewart, some of the big men, even with them being in foul trouble, mind you, and having to step out of the game early, they were still able to come back and not miss a step whatsoever. You could say that the Pistons were being as effective as possible on offense, and granted, the numbers will tell you that, but defensively, the Knicks were just giving them pretty much everything at that point. It all culminated in just a terrible streak in the second half, because naturally at that point, Brunson was beginning to cool down after a hot first quarter. He had 12 points in that time. They started to bottle him up a little bit. And he would still finish with a decent game, but he would be forced to be turnover prone. And you had guys, especially when you look at Asar Thompson, understanding that this is the same man who was on the receiving end of the series clinching shot against them in the first round of the last year's playoffs. He was determined to try to lock his ass up. And granted, even in those situations where Brunson got his, Thompson was right in his body. Asar Thompson, that would be. He wasn't creating enough space against him, and everything that he attempted was earned, not given whatsoever. That's how it is with the Pistons in general. So, with that being said, the offensive slump from the Knicks could not be seen as too much of a surprise from, general observers. But, man, for them to just go through this stretch of inefficiency is absolutely crazy for a team with that much offensive firepower. And again, you're expecting your defense to at least keep you around in the game. But with Karl-Anthony Towns also, and again, that's going to be a theme as well, just being anemic at times as an offensive player and also just being undisciplined. They fell into quite the trap here. They only put up 15 points in this quarter, while Cade Cunningham himself had 11 third quarter points. That output for the Knicks would be their lowest in a third quarter all season long. The lowest in any single quarter that the Knicks have had up to that point in the season. And once that went down, there was absolutely no chance of them really coming back from this. They also allowed the Pistons to open up the fourth quarter and get out of the third with a 12-2 run at that point as well. And all of that I mentioned did not even compare to some of the stuff they were doing in this fourth quarter. And that's how I knew that this shit was a wrap, that the Knicks were out of this. And again, it's a bad sign when looking at a team that, hey, they're still near the top of the Eastern Conference, but they're expecting to get a championship out of this team when you're showcasing such a lack of effort. I mean, at the end of the day, it does come down to technique. It does come down to formations. But you have to be willing at some point or another to get into the nitty-gritty and face up against another competitor on the other side of the basketball. There's no way in any universe why there were multiple sequences on multiple possessions in that fourth quarter. And I know the game is a blowout by this point. There's no way that guys like Javonte Green and even to, a few points of time, Duncan Robinson as well, no reason should you be leaving those guys so wide open, even in the fast break, to where all they got to do is dribble into the shot. They have enough time to get that off and still have a clean look fired away for an easy tray. That's not okay whatsoever. So at that point, the Pistons were truly just running up the score, and they had all rights to. They limited the New York squad severely and were just uber efficient on the night, playing to their identity and their strengths. They won in pretty much every way. They had 9 more offensive rebounds. They had 44 on the night in this game, and they had 21 fast break points while also forcing 20 turnovers and getting 33 points off of those turnovers, while the Knicks had just 10 in this game, making up a good majority of what would be a 121-90 victory for this team. And again, in this game, you had Jalen Brunson still get his with 25 points and 3 rebounds on 10 of 21 shooting. He did also have 6 turnovers in this game. Pretty much everybody else struggled. Miles McBride did give them a solid punch off the bench with 17 points and 5 threes. But amongst his starters, OG Anunoby only put up 5 and had himself a rough outing overall. Karl-Anthony Towns had 6 points and 6 turnovers himself. And then Mitchell Robinson, you're not expecting him to do much. He did pull down 10 rebounds. But by that point, as they continue to inch closer and closer to victory in the situation, he becomes more of a liability than you would anticipate. So, all those things did not work to their advantage in this game. As for the Pistons, Cade Cunningham had 29 points and 13 assists on 11 of 17 shooting with 3 threes. And the team as a whole, when looking at it, they have 5 players score double digits, and they shot 54% from the field, essentially, while shooting 51.6% from deep. You compare that to the Knicks, and they were okay, but not remotely good enough on that side to keep pace. They got bullied all night long. And again, for a team looking to take that next step into championship appearances and a potential win, not just merely getting there and settling for a loss, if that is to continue, that's a stretch that they can't break eventually and get on the right track. I don't know how much hope a Knicks fan could really have in that situation, to be honest. Moving on to the Warriors and Clippers match on that Monday as well. Watching it live, they mentioned that James Harden was not playing. He was dealing with an injury and he was just chilling on the sideline, mellowed out. I'm thinking, oh, okay, this should be somewhat easy. Okay, it's only Kawhi. I mean, it was so weird. Like, the Warriors themselves forced 5 turnovers in the first 3 minutes. And at that point, you would think that this game would be tipping in their favor at this point in time. Instead, all of that would come in the midst of what would be a 19-5 run to open the game for the Clippers. And the shooting prowess for both teams, the efficiency would kind of level out. This was honestly a pretty defensive-minded game. But you had those ebbs and flows where the Warriors themselves had to try to rally back from so far behind because of the lack, honestly, of being able to slow Kawhi down for one, and then being so concerned with him that it allowed them an opportunity to space out from deep. And granted, over the entire run that the Clippers have had to reach that record with their, winning streak of games, they'd been prolific from three. So those were just killers. Like, at every time you were thinking that the Warriors were chipping back into the game before yet another tough three-pointer was made. Like, Batum himself had a pair of three-pointers to round up the first quarter here, and while the Warriors would somehow, some way, make this at halftime essentially a 4-point game, it didn't come without any sort of, just continuation of the matter at hand here. It wasn't even just Kawhi getting the work done. Like, how about Kobe Sanders in this game as well overall? He would have himself quite a night, and he wasn't just, taking what the defense gave him. No, he was hunting players down. Was hitting shots over Stephen Curry in the mid-range, and this is despite him suffering a situation where Curry got one of his earlier buckets, making him drop to the floor on a pump fake. He did not take kindly to that and would proceed to just light it up in his own fashion. They dared him to shoot on a couple occasions, and he was making them pay for it. So at that point, if you're getting that kind of contribution from Sanders, it takes a decent amount of pressure off Kawhi Leonard at that point. And ultimately, he would have those situations where he himself would begin to take over like a true robot, especially in the mid-range. Because, again, outside of Draymond Green, you're not going to have a lot of defenders on that team that can truly keep up with the man. And even when you decide to put in other players at the 5 position, the Clippers continued to exploit it. They understood that that was a weak point for the Warriors throughout the course of this game. And so they continued to pound the rock in the motherfucking paint, force some kind of commitment on the end of the center in the play, and catch them in a bind. Like, that would lead to a couple of threes for them in this situation. It would also get Zubac wide open in yet another scenario. And before you knew it, the Clippers, despite the Warriors trying to make this progress, they were pushing the lead back out. And this third quarter especially was just a killer. Especially considering how this game would end up being. They did not, and I mean did not, even remotely show up at all, it felt like. Their efficiency was so damn low in this third quarter, and they had made at that point only like a couple of field goals. They had 13 points in this specific period. Like, all the Clippers needed was a couple more knockout punches, and they were probably set to go. But the Warriors have been this kind of team at times where even though you think you have them down for the count, they find a way through, simple strength in numbers. That motto, right? They find a way to get themselves back in the ball game. I mean, hell, they started it out with a quick 10-2 run with Gary Payton II getting himself six fourth quarter points at that time. Even then, you still didn't have too much resistance, as even with every response, like for example, you get Brandon Podziemski spotting up for a nice 3-pointer, but then you also had Kawhi himself getting one of his signature buckets. It was just back and forth and back and forth. Unfortunately, for the longest period of time, even when you get into what would be clutch territory. And the Warriors themselves were feeling the heat because the Clippers, with Kawhi Leonard jamming one into the bucket, he would space it right back out to essentially a 13-point lead at that time. And at that point, you have less than 5 minutes remaining in the game. You have to pull out all the stops at that point. And it could get uncomfortable if you are Golden State in this scenario. However, when you have a veteran presence, heralded, or I guess led by Jimmy Butler III and Stephen Curry and the like, it kind of flows easier in a way. And the Warriors themselves, they started to trim it down immediately. They got the game within 4 at a point before Chris Dunn was somehow, some way left wide open. And I mean, even when the broadcast was on, it was chaos itself. They had Snoop Dogg on it and everything like that. But it was mentioned by Steve Kerr, I guess, leading up to the game, that he was comfortable with leaving Chris Dunn wide open from deep. And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. But at the same time, in that situation, at that time in the game, you want to have a body on pretty much anyone that's playing out there. You don't want to leave people open and give them free looks. Even if you live with the result, it's like, come on. You actively see your team trying to get themselves back into it. You can't have that happen. Nevertheless, that would continue what would essentially be a 19-7 run for the Warriors at that point. Stephen Curry, at the same time, was battling foul trouble, but he was still able to get in a couple clutch 3-pointers to bring the game within 1. All of a sudden, the Warriors had a fighting chance. The crowd was getting hyped up as much as they possibly could. And if you were the Warriors here, you needed a single stop. You couldn't foul, and you had to do whatever you could to try to protect Stephen Curry in this scenario, understanding that he is going to generate the most quality looks on the offensive side of the basketball. So they inbound this pass, and before we even get much going underway, you have a situation take place where Zubac misses everything and gets the offensive rebound back before dumping it down to Chris Dunn, and they call Stephen Curry for the ill-fated foul. At that point, he already had 5, so for one of the first times in pretty much 8 or 9 years, he would foul out of the ball game. And while the Warriors would still have a chance after all of this to seal the game, Jimmy Butler III would miss a tough one right near the horn, and there wasn't enough time to really produce a putback. So from that standpoint, the Clippers would win 103-102 in just a tough bout for both teams. It wasn't pretty, but the Clippers would maintain some level of winning with this result right here. Not the cleanest shooting night for them, especially from deep with 34.5% accuracy. But hey, they did enough to give themselves the advantage for the longer period of time. And defensively, they were much better than that, forcing the Warriors themselves, being a high volume 3-point shooting team, to shoot just 24.4% from that range and not be able to find any other sort of offense to generate at that time. So that would be everything for the Clippers in what was a 1-point game. All of their starters put up over double digits, and while Kawhi Leonard would take 25 shots to get 24 points, he still led the way for them. Also nabbing 12 rebounds on the night along with 5 assists. Kobe Sanders had 20 points and 7 rebounds along with 3 assists on 9 of 16, shooting with 2 threes. And John Collins had 18 points and 4 rebounds on 7 of 12, shooting with 3 threes. As for the Dubs, Stephen Curry had 27 points, 6 assists, and 3 steals on 9 of 23, shooting with 4 threes. Jimmy Butler III had 24 points and 4 steals on 7 of 16 shooting. And Gary Payton II provided 14 points and 5 rebounds off the bench on 7 of 10 shooting. It always is tough to see a game come down to those near makes in terms of shot selection. But you got to perform much better earlier on in the game so that you're not left with that kind of bitter taste in your mouth. It's as simple as that. But at least in their case, the Warriors, with some of the other games here on the docket, they would bounce back in time. Man, okay. Moving on to the action from last Tuesday, or a few Tuesdays ago, I should say. You have the Heat and the Pistons here on the 6th, and oh man. The Heat and the Timberwolves in this damn scenario, bro. This was just tough for the Heat from this standpoint. Similar way to the Pistons Knicks in that it was close early on. Like, you had Norm Powell and Anthony Edwards off the rip just going at it against each other, back and forth with 3-pointers in 8-point first quarters. But ultimately, the Heat would manage to take it back in time despite having Julius Randle also take some pretty damn smart looks. And I like how he played in this game. I will say, there were so many times where they decided, hey, we're just going to put a smaller guy on him for some reason to make him uncomfortable. Do they not understand how strong Julius Randle can be? And if he actually, becomes a lot smarter with his overall facilitating, like, his damage as a potential forward in this situation, working out of the post, could be dangerous. And he utilized that well. Like, he did a great job of exploiting these mismatches. And you also have to credit Chris Finch for being willing to set up those kinds of plays specifically for him to operate. And it kind of spurred the whole team on, even when they would go through some rough stretches in this game, which were very few and far in between, to be completely honest with you. And that would be as a result of their defensive ability. I'll say this. The Heat as well, they are a team, obviously, they've been leading the league, at least especially earlier in the year, and they're probably still near the top in terms of pace of play in the league. They love to run fast around the court, and they love to operate again, as Adebayo himself revealed, without those kinds of screens, without all of these different traditional play calls. They want to utilize as much motion as possible, and they want to be able to work against defenses that are similarly not in perfect positioning. Where the Timberwolves won this game was forcing them to play half-court offense. Like, yeah, they can go bucket for bucket. I mean, hell, you saw that with them literally trading three-pointer after three-pointer early on. But a few Minnesota runs here, including this 13-5 run that they had, show just how much Miami struggled in this game with operating in a half-court set. Their defenders on the Timberwolves end, they are way too physical in this regard for Miami to want to deal with in this situation. And it affected a lot of the other players here. Like, Norman Powell, by and large, was still effective. But when you look at everybody else, Andrew Wiggins, Kello Ware, Bam Adebayo, those guys struggle against this defense. And that cooldown would affect them completely by the end of this half. You know, it was a 7-point game at this time, and the Timberwolves did possess the lead, but this third quarter would just see everything go to absolute shit for this Heat squad. Because with taking everything into account there, they also brought up a couple of graphics at halftime. One of them would state that the Heat at that point in the year, they were 15-3 when attempting more than 98 shots in a game, and they were on pace for that exactly. So they were already teetering on the edge of not being as efficient as they would like, not being able to attack this defense in the same way they would try to against other teams. However, they started out this third quarter with an instant 10-3 run to just blow the doors off of this game entirely. And you also had Dante DiVincenzo get red hot in this time as well to just extend some three-point shooting ability for this team. Credit to them defensively as well, because you mentioned all those different defenders that the Timberwolves had. Gobert actually decided for once that he's going to play like a man who previously acquired a DPOY. He'd been on a streak of games with double-doubles, if I'm not mistaken, and is one of the top rebounders in the league at this point. So those things were going to be handled, but defensively, teams and players specifically, we understand, have tried for ages now to pick on this man relentlessly. Especially when you bring him up from the paint on the perimeter and try to force him to guard an agile, shifty guard with smaller size and, I guess, better hand-eye coordination as well. However, he was not fazed by that much in this game. He did a great job of not getting baited by those things like he typically would. He truly played sound defense. And once that was happening, everything else flowed through nicely from there. The Heat, at this point, they were just putting up garbage time, contributions here. They had a few different players step in. Even had Kasparas Yakichanis get a few minutes in this game. And he would get a couple of free throws to go. But the Timberwolves, with the work of their starters, would get it done with a final score of 122-94 on that day. The Timberwolves saw Anthony Edwards put up 26 points, 5 rebounds and 3 assists on 8 of 18, shooting with 5 threes. Jaden McDaniels as well was also doing some craziness in the post himself. Similar way, honestly. And we're talking about with fadeaway shots. Those shits were looking so clean. And it all culminated in him putting up 19 points and 3 rebounds in this game on 7 of 15 shooting. Julius Randle had 15 points as well, along with the 11 rebounds. Rudy Gobert, as I mentioned, had 13 points and 16 rebounds. And then Naz Reid off the bench also had 14 points. But as for the Heat, Norman Powell, again, by and far the most consistent player for this team in this game, with 21 points on 9 of 17 shooting and 3 threes. Tyler Hero had 17 points as well off the bench in his first true action all season long, which was just a tough return for him considering that, but I digress. Everywhere else was just so bad. Like, you had a few people, again, a lot of it has to do with garbage time. You had a few people shoot 50% from the field below this mark, but when the game mattered, nobody else could effectively hit their shots. And that would prove to be trouble. Again, they are having to deal with a number of close contests and solid closeouts from a Timberwolves team compared to them generating easy looks in the open court if they were operating as they intended. Timberwolves, again, having none of that shit at all whatsoever. Alright, moving on to the Mavs and the Kings on this particular day as well. Two of the worst teams in the league, let alone the Western Conference at this point. But, this would turn out to be a little chaotic. It's interesting to consider, because you had, and I was interested to see what Maxime Reynaud would do on this day. You know, he'd been putting together a solid few games, and, you know, it would be the first time of my watching him live. However, this game, for him, would be a little bit of a mixed bag. And you could say that for the Kings as well. Like, he was decent. And the Kings were able to, at times, capitalize on their ability to turn the Mavericks over and get a number of easy looks in transition. Some of those very much included Maxime Reynaud in the open court. It took a little bit to get it going, but once they got to that point, for example, with a 14-4 run here earlier on in this game, I mean, they kept the Mavericks on ice for a while. In fact, the Mavericks were trailing at this point. And I mean, they mentioned that Cooper was one of four rookies, along with Luka Doncic, Larry Bird, and Magic Johnson, to average 18, 6, and 4 through their first 35 games. As great as that was, he himself had been cold. You had other players like Najee Marshall and even Daniel Gafford again, where the downside of Reynaud's game here comes in. He was torching his ass. And it's what you would expect from Daniel Gafford being a little more athletic. But I'm talking about getting it done in the post as well, with some hook shots, with some easy floaters. Man, they were easily exploiting him in the pick and roll game. And that, in time, would allow the Mavericks to slowly creep their way back into it. However, again, by this point, at the end of the first half, they were still trailing by 12 points. So they had some work to do if they wanted to come out on top in this game. And I mean, hey, consider this as well. By a point in the second quarter, the Kings, again, to put it all into perspective, had an 18-5 advantage in fast break points. They would make that progress, especially later on in the third quarter, with none other than Brandon Williams being at the center of that. The amount that this man has been able to do for this team in this time, especially with Kyrie Irving being out, is absolutely insane. I think it would have to be studied at this point. Like, he himself, over the course of what would be a 12-4 run, did manage to somehow out-hustle Keon Ellis, first and foremost. That's a difficult task to do with that character right there, but then he also put up 8 third quarter points of his own to bring this team back within striking distance. And like, you can still see at this point, he would tie up the game on an and one, pretty much, on Reynaud, of all people. with that man standing at 7 foot tall. It's insane. Whatever advice Kyrie Irving has been giving him on the side, it's been working. Now, Irving himself, it's crazy to consider. We are in January, and I think he was pressed about it earlier on, and he said that there is still no timetable for his return, but you have to believe that if he is able to come back this season, it would be much sooner rather than later. So that is something that'll still have to be monitored from time to time. But at the very least, you can say that Brandon Williams and Ryan Nembhard, even though, again, it's pretty revealing that Nembhard is the de facto starter right now, both of them at the guard position are holding down the fort at this time. And it would all culminate in them being able to get out of what was a gritty back and forth fourth quarter between both teams. That's one thing you can say about this kind of game, especially considering the final score. It was just gritty in nature. You were not having teams go out of their way to, be the sole proprietors of their own actions in this. They had to fight tooth and nail to get their own respective buckets against each other. Nothing was made easy in this. And that's what you want to see in this kind of defensive style of basketball. It's why I have a high value for it. There's just gotta be a bit of appreciation for that. But yeah, you would have the Kings get out to an early lead in this time. And the Mavericks, it was slow for both teams for a while there because neither team was really able to make anything for a few minutes on end, in fact. Yet, when it came time to get it done in clutch time, Najee Marshall would start to get some action going himself. He would have 7 points in this time span alone. And while he would have Masim Reynaud ultimately be able to get out and give the Kings a bit of a lead before DeMar DeRozan himself would also cash in a three-pointer, it would be the combination of Brandon Williams and Cooper Flagg being able to turn it around a little bit in this time frame, find his own shot, and ultimately allow this team, with both of those contributions, to take a brief lead. And while the Kings still had a chance to get up a bucket of their own, DeMar DeRozan has a penchant for getting those kinds of shots in late game situations. He would be off in this scenario. Though again, it was crazy because you have Russell Westbrook attempt this shot first, which made absolutely no sense, and then they got lucky with Najee Marshall missing both of his free throws. But even still, even with that being said, the Mavericks would win 100-98 on this day. From their side, Anthony Davis had 19 points and 16 rebounds in this game on terrible shooting, but again, in a defensive bout, that's to be expected. No problem with that. Cooper Flagg had 20 points, 8 rebounds, and 6 assists on 8 of 15 shooting with 2 threes. Brandon Williams off the bench had 18 points, 2 assists, steals, and rebounds on 7 of 13 shooting, and Najee Marshall also had 15 points on 7 of 10 shooting to pair up with 7 rebounds. Daniel Gafford also chipped in a double-double with 10 points and 13 rebounds. As for the Kings, Zach LaVine had 20 points and 4 rebounds. DeMar DeRozan had 21 points and 5 assists on 8 of 18 shooting. And Masim Reynaud had 9 rebounds and 14 points, although again, with some of the defensive lapses, he fell out of the game, which, by that particular point, was just the worst possible thing they could have had happen. You want to have a true big man down there to deter those kinds of buckets from Flagg and then Williams, respectively, but I digress. All right. Then you get into some of the more recent action. So to start it out, on Tuesday, you had it start out with the Thunder and the Spurs again. And I know, hell, they mentioned that these teams play each other for a 5th time in early February. So, it seems with the way things went, the Spurs are definitely going to have some shit to talk about, because I will say, it was looking like for a while in this game, it was just going to be the same story over and over and over again, as it has been with them, especially in those 3 matchups in a span of 12 days that saw the Spurs win all 3 of them and derail a shot for the Thunder to post what at the time would have put them on pace for by far the best regular season record in NBA history. It was like the same story every time in terms of getting down to the wire, executing all the little details, and being able to hit a second gear at the right time to take advantage of the Thunder and ultimately come out with the victory in any form. And these weren't even games where Victor Wembanyama was starting per se. These were limited minutes in which he was being deployed out there along with other players like Stephon Castle and De'Aaron Fox, giving them nightmare after nightmare when they were playing. So not only can you say that the contributions from each player were being valued here, but you can also argue that Mitch Johnson, in his first true season of action as a full-time head coach, it's like, he is actively going toe-to-toe with Mark Daigneault in the coaching aspect, and maybe even in these games when it comes down to creating those kinds of sets to get players in their right spots to operate. When it comes to shutting down Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at times, they held him to low efficiency in at least the last matchup they had against each other, if I'm not mistaken. And when it comes down to overall management of the game, you could say that Mitch Johnson himself was out coaching Mark Daigneault in a way. So this fourth time, they were going to have to lay it all out there. The Thunder, at this point, they understood what was going on here. And you even had Shai say as much, even in one of the earlier losses, just kind of explaining that, even with them believing that they were at the peak of their powers, man, the Spurs are outplaying them. The Spurs are the better team in this scenario. And we have to find a way to get back to what it is that we do on our end that makes us special and come out on top this time around. And by goodness, they would find it, especially in the third quarter. A third quarter of absolute doom for the Spurs team. Because one of the main things that would stand out, especially when you just watch the first few minutes of the game, clearly Victor Wembanyama fucking hates Chet Holmgren. Clearly. How many times do people need to try to convince you that there is no rivalry between the two? You have to look no further than just the first few possessions of the game. These niggas were going back and forth at each other, taking it right to the other defender single-handedly. And overall in this game, it would be Wembanyama who in a way outplayed Chet Holmgren. I mean, that brother was trying to do everything to the man. He was getting some post work done against him. He was hitting jump shots against him. And he even tried to, on a play that didn't end up counting. Bro, this man had the gall to try to get a fucking putback dunk right over his head. So you're going to sit here, you see all that, and you will say that they don't have beef with each other. Okay, sure. But another thing as well is that for whatever reason, again, you're giving Victor Wembanyama exactly what he wants in that scenario. If he does not believe that there is a comparison between those two in the basketball realm, of course he's going to try to do everything he can to torch the man. So the Thunder decided early and often, and pretty much for the rest of the game after this third quarter, that okay, we are going to pull Chet Holmgren away from you and force you to go after some of our other young and hungry dogs on the defensive side of the ball. They threw Jalen Williams at him, J-Dub. They threw Kenrich Williams at him on multiple occasions. They threw Alex Caruso at him at times. They threw Jalen Williams on him at times. They just had a rotating cast of players all trying to get up in Victor Wembanyama's chest with physicality and make him feel their presence. Force him, and they were able to at times, force damn near shot clock violations or force uncomfortable shots on Victor Wembanyama. And at that point, they also as well, in other times, felt that, okay, if we take Wembanyama away, let's see if anybody else can beat us at this point. Because, yes, the guards, in terms of Castle and Fox, they've been doing damage in these games themselves, but the system runs through Wembanyama. I don't think there's a question about that. If we can stop you from being able to dump the ball down to him in the post, and you can see on multiple occasions, he is calling for the ball. He's clapping his hands in frustration, calling for the ball. And you have a wave of different defenders, all focused on denying him the action, forcing the Thunder, the Spurs, into scenarios where they had to just chuck up shots that were very much outside of the rhythm of their offense. And it hurt them mightily, because that generated easy looks in transition for them when it came to pulling down boards and getting out and running on defense. They were able to force a shit ton of turnovers too. And before you know it, not only did they open that third quarter with an 11-3 run and having J-Dub account for 10 overall third quarter points in this game, but you also had them finish out the quarter with a 20-3 run overall. And again, this was a game that was pretty much within single possession territory and consistently even being tied up at times early in the third quarter. Yet, when this was over, this was a 19-point ball game at the end of it, as you had Kenrich Williams space out for that time. Meanwhile, SGA himself, they held him down for a while, but he would also have 15 points in the third quarter as a player who has one of the highest overall tallies in the regular season in that specific period of play. So that right there would tell you everything you had to understand about this game. And even in the fourth quarter, the Spurs, they were trying to chip away with some buckets of their own, but then they just allowed some easy three-point shots. Like, there were situations where Kenrich Williams, and I think even when you look back at that 3 to space it out to 19 at the time, you literally have him just pitching passes over to, the open man. And you don't have a Spur out there anywhere near him on the rotation, and they just get up an easy shot. Like, that was inexcusable. But by that point, the damage had already been done, and the Thunder would win 119-98. So, hey, the Spurs would certainly put together a masterclass on how to attack this Thunder team in those 3 games, in those 12 days. However, the Thunder in this one, especially when you look at that third quarter, had to remind them, had to show them exactly who the fuck they were as a team. By that point as well, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and honestly, by the time of the recording of this video, more than likely still does lead the NBA in 30-point ball games. That would be no different for him here, as he had 34, 5, and 5 in this one. On 11 of 23 shooting with a three-pointer, Jalen Williams, J-Dub, had 20 points and 3 assists. Surprisingly, no rebounds, but he shot down to 15 from the field. So that's pretty respectable. And overall, they generated 51.9% shooting overall, while also having 11 points in transition and just dominating in the paint as well. Because Dagno, he didn't shy away from it. They showed a clip of him from a press conference, kind of affirming that, hey, okay, generating those shots in the paint, they're high efficiency looks, and that is our identity of basketball. That's why we prefer to play that way. That's why we prefer to have a lot of our sets be concentrated in that area of the court, because we know that is going to be our mentality through and through. And they would more than put that on display in this game. As for the Spurs, it's not like it's a disaster for them. But I would think it's just a reality check that shows that, hey, they still have some work to do too. on their end to become a better team. They can be a physical threat, but the Thunder are on a completely different level. And you had multiple Thunder players, you had multiple Spurs players just feeling it instantly. Like Wembanyama himself would go down at points with injury scares, and he would play through the rest of the game. But they had to be careful with playing him out there after a time, because, it was just getting into damn near Bush League territory out there. Within the confines of the game, at least. They were not allowing it, under any circumstances, to have him just take over. They had to make other players work for it. At the very least, Stephon Castle was able to contribute 20 points, 8 assists, and 7 rebounds on the night on 6 of 13, shooting with 3 threes, to flank Wembanyama's 17 points and 7 rebounds. But even when you look in other places, although there were some solid contributions, especially from De'Aaron Fox, Julian Champagny, and also Dylan Harper adding 12 points off the bench, it was far from enough in this one to throw the Thunder off of their rhythm at all. And now, to move on to the Tuesday action that would cap off everything for the night, you get the Warriors. Essentially, this goes without saying, because you could say that this was affected a lot by Denny Avdia not being in the game. And that's really what this result comes down to. The Warriors flat out dominated the Trailblazers. So I don't need to go into anything play-by-play wise for that. I'd just be doing way too much. But you felt the difference in both teams. You have the Warriors at near full strength with Stephen Curry not even having to affect the game as a shooter. He had a poor shooting night. But by just having multiple presences, and him, in Draymond, in some of the other guard play off the bench, and Jimmy Butler III, that could truly move the ball around in an effective way and keep these defenders off balance and out of their defensive sets. That made all the difference for the Warriors in this game. They had, overall in this game, 34 assists on the night, and overall 42 buckets. That is a very high rate of assists combined with made field goals off of them. That was insane. And they were able to, as well, force Portland, as a team who, again, they have great players on their side. Shaedon Sharpe, again, is a player that is constantly a threat. Caleb Love gave them the work in one of the previous games they've had against them. You have to understand, they hadn't won a game against them all season. This was the final one, and they were avoiding a season sweep. They did it successfully. But, in this particular game, you don't have a true player on the court outside of Drew Holiday who would return but come off of the bench, who can truly generate offensive looks for those around them in an efficient manner to keep some form of fluidity with the roster in this regard. They don't have that. They are still awaiting to have a true point guard back, but you could compensate with having Denny Avdia operate, honestly, in a similar way to what Jimmy Butler III does. He doesn't always operate from the post, but he is a player who uses his size to his advantage while being a point forward and can draw contact to get easy looks from, the interior scoring, also draw a lot of fouls with one of the higher free throw attempt rates in the league. And that is a player, again, who is on all-star trajectory, because you should all-star that nigga, right? You have that kind of talent missing, it's going to be tough for you to compete. And you felt that from the Trailblazers. They had an inspired run. I will give them credit for this. They faced a flurry of just shit from the Warriors in this one. They were down essentially at halftime by a score of 67-41. Okay, it was that bad. They started off the third quarter promising consistently, to be honest. Had a 19-5 run. It was looking as if they had gotten a few more stops, they had an opportunity to make this very intriguing. And yet, even then, as this run was coming to a close, you still saw just exactly what they were missing here. I have no explanation for how you get a steal here by jumping a pass exceptionally well on Shaedon Sharpe's end. You settle for the three-pointer and you have Toumani Camara miss it at that point. There is no way that something like that can happen. And momentum's crazy too, because after that play, right then and right there, you would have the Warriors go on a 7-0 run that they essentially never relented from. They maintained control throughout the rest of this game after that. And again, it just sucks from their perspective, because if the Trailblazers were at full strength, and they have been at full strength, they've had the Warriors' number all season long, to their credit. And I think that's a way that you could look at this game. Still, you have to play the team in front of you. And this team, again, overall, they just did not have that kind of facilitating presence. And again, facilitating presence in terms of one guy truly being able to stand out and spur a whole unit in that regard. They don't have that. You even had the broadcast team mention that, okay, if you don't have a guy that can do that, the best thing you can do in that scenario is keep the ball moving around. Keep rotating it around. You don't have a de facto guy, that's okay. Make up for that by keeping it in constant motion and keeping those defenders in constant motion to eventually generate high percentage looks on your end. And again, at times they were able to do it. Hell, you saw it in that 19-5 run, but for most of the rest of the game, they were just unable to. And I guess from that standpoint as well, even though this man only took 4 shots in the game, some of the shot selection was terrible, because at a point, if you're not going to generate open looks, well, you're going to be forced to shoot a number of terrible shots. I couldn't explain any of the ones that CD Zizoko, that is, took up in this game. They were just so off-putting. And at a point, I'm like, okay, stop shooting, bro. Matter of fact, don't even give him the ball. That's how crazy it was. Like, how about DeAnthony Melton in this game overall as well, putting up 23 points on 9 of 14 shooting off the bench with 4 threes. And Brandon Pajemski also had 15 points, 4 rebounds, and assists, and 2 steals off the bench. Like, that kind of contribution, that kind of work on a night where, again, Stephen Curry would have 11 assists, a season high, with a single turnover, being a true point guard in every sense of the word. He wasn't doing that kind of Curry flurry damage that you would typically expect in this situation. And they were still able to make the most out of it. As we constantly say, gravity, man. And as we'll have to refer to again with one of the next games, that is what it comes down to. You know, it is not always about the three-point shot with him, but the threat of that and what he can parlay that into as a general offensive mind. It's like, it's a lot to handle for an opponent, simply put. Then you get into the action that I watched yesterday. So to start it out with the Thunder and the Rockets. Oh boy. It was pretty intriguing for a while. And I mean, hell, coming into it, this is the second time they faced off against each other, and the first time they faced off against each other since the opening night game, which again still stands as one of the better ones of the entire year. That's how competitive that double overtime barn burner of a match was. And it's safe to say that a lot has been learned from that time to now. These teams are two of the best in the Western Conference. There's no doubt about that. But I think one of the biggest things that ended up working out for the Thunder in this game, because Alperen Sengun was laying down the fucking hammer in that first game to start off what has been a truly good season for him that could warrant some all-star consideration. In his case, like, he had, I believe, at that time, a 33-point double-double or something like that. And even with them throwing different defenders at him, Sengun wasn't phased at that point at all. In fact, they were giving him shots in the clutch to keep on bailing Houston out, even when it looked like that game was going to be out of reach for them and out of the potential to win. No, not with Alperen Sengun doing what he did in that particular matchup. They started to limit that pretty early on in this. There would be possessions where he was able to initiate that kind of bully ball presence, including the few on Chet Holmgren, and get it done. As that was limited, though, no problem for the Rockets. That's what you have Kevin Durant there for, to alleviate the pressure, and oh no. He started off this game atrociously from the field. The entire Rockets team did. Now again, at a point it's like, with some of them, you could say that they were just toughly guarded by the Thunder defense. And that would especially be the case later in the game. Others could be forced. This was a fitting time for them to mention a stat that before the last Houston game, Jabari Smith had missed 20 straight three-pointers. This Houston team, and same with the Thunder, although, they finished the game shooting okay from deep. This game for me wasn't going to be about how well these teams could shoot from deep, because neither of these teams, especially when you look at it last season, were that great at it at all. This game, in a similar way to the first one, was really going to come down to how these teams played on the glass. And I will say that the Thunder did a great job of getting, those opportunistic rebounds, but the Rockets, even when they were able to get those second chance opportunities, they had the advantage for a while. They just were not at all efficient. The Thunder's interior defense in this game was insane. You had Chet Holmgren playing like a potential DPOY candidate, even without Isaiah Hartenstein being there. And when you have that go down, you have an overall system filled with elite defender after elite defender bought in to a unified system, that they just put it all out on the line for themselves. The fact that this was a close game somewhat by the end of the first half, despite the Rockets shooting just 33% from the field and having Kevin Durant be held to very suboptimal shooting, was kind of a miracle in their case. But, they did start to figure it out. They had KD to open up the third quarter at least, put together a few solid buckets, and they were making a solid run here. However, man, the Thunder would start to pull away within a matter of minutes. This is how it is every time. You're in a tight battle with them. You think you've got them exactly where you want them until you don't. At all. And it's crazy because SGA, for all this time, was not doing much in the first half either. In fact, his 20-point game streak was in total danger for a good portion of time in this game. So he was not that much of a problem, although he was still able to get his buckets in bunches. That's how it is. But even with that brief period of time there, the Rockets were able to get back into this game towards the tail end of the quarter with J.D. Davison, the G League MVP J.D. Davison. putting together a solid third quarter to get them within 2. Like, I didn't expect that at all. And then to make matters even crazier, even wackier, they had to finish out a single tenth of a second left in the third quarter before instantly jumping back into the fourth. And I'm like, okay, that's... I've genuinely never seen some shit like that before, to be honest with you. I can't lie and say that I have. But, hey man, I guess, right? So, now you get into the fourth quarter, and, yeah, it just all went downhill for this team. All of it. Because the Thunder, despite them not being as great of a three-point shooting team, they were just able to pile up a number of consecutive three-point makes in a row, aided mainly with A.J. Mitchell continuing what has been a hot shooting streak for him over the past few games, and he's genuinely, again, over the course of the season, been a pretty fucking good player for this Thunder team. And again, I didn't anticipate that at all. But that lefty stroke would continue to invoke a lot of fear in the hearts of the Rockets defense. And again, this is without SGA even having to really do all that much. It's crazy. Because that's what happens when you fill out your roster with good depth pieces. That's how it is. But again, nobody wants to, I guess I can make that point. Like, yes, the Thunder would get some hate that could be considered to be deserved, but I'll say this, anybody who wants to genuinely just, shit on them like that, I'm like, again, as I'm saying, they have been building this from the ground up all across decades. They didn't just reach this point. They've been working on this for such a long time. And they have so much complementary talent on their roster. Rather than recognizing how difficult that actually is to pull off for any team in an NBA, and giving the Thunder their respect for getting it done, we all of a sudden throw that out of the window just because of a few different things. It's a little crazy to me, but I digress. It just kept on going for the Rockets as well. They were able to get their fair share of overall boards. They finished with 60 on the night. And again, even when they got second chance looks, these players were not relenting. But I think, across what would be a 13-4 run, and what would really tell me a lot about how this game was going was towards the tail end, you had Alex Caruso essentially having to switch off of Alperen Sengun at that point, or at least trying to account for him on a pick. And at that point, KD gets the ball. You already have interior help, so he switches off of Sengun at this time. He sneaks behind KD and forces a sign out, essentially, by getting the ball out of his hands, and he's hustling for it. He's diving for a loose ball and everything. Then you get the ball back in bounds, and they proceed to hound them defensively to the point where they force a shot clock violation, essentially. And at that point, that's how I knew that this was going to be wrapped up. So the Thunder would get the 111-91 win with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander by the skin of his teeth, putting up 20 points to continue his streak, along with 4 assists on 6 of 11 shooting. When have you ever seen a game like that from SGA? It's so abnormal, but he still got it done. Chet Holmgren, on the other hand, would have 18 points and 9 rebounds on 7 of 9 shooting with 2 threes to go along with 4 blocks in this game, and not a single turnover. A.J. Mitchell had 17 points off the bench on 7 of 10 shooting with 5 rebounds and 3 assists. Lucius Dort had 13 rebounds as well. And as for the Rockets, as you had Jabari Smith Jr. and Alperen Sengun put up double-doubles with 17 and 10 and 14 and 13, respectively. Kevin Durant also had 19 points and 7 rebounds on 7 of 23 shooting without a single three, which is insane. Meanwhile, Amen Thompson has been putting together a solid month. He'd been averaging about 23 at this point. He's also averaging a career high in assists this season. And it makes sense, they've stated, through a broadcast or some of the graphics on there, that he'd been playing a few more minutes overall this season and a higher percentage of minutes at the point guard position, which makes sense. He was doing that in Overtime Elite, and you saw with some of the specific passes he was making in this game exactly why he's seen that increase. But the Thunder were overall able to limit that entirely. And he, again, overall from the field was just not great. Like, you want to get into a defensive battle, that's okay. But anytime you shoot 33% from the field, essentially, and 29% from deep, no matter how good your defense is, it's going to be much harder in this day and age to win a ball game like that. There is, without a doubt, no question about that. Like, you can't get away with that, bruh. So, it was a valiant effort from the Rockets for a while. But with the Thunder being able to heat up at just the right time, they would take them down and increase their record overall to 35-7 as of the recording of this video. Pretty much halfway through their specific regular season. So that's, again, interesting junction we're in now. And this game right here, to conserve time as well, I don't need to, again, do too much from a play-by-play perspective, because the Warriors, to extend their, stretch of wins to 10 over the last 14 games overall, pretty good mark considering where they were at, just a few weeks back. But they would blow out the Knicks essentially 126-113. At times, this game did get closer, but man, they mentioned overall that these teams were two of the highest overall volume shooting teams in the NBA. So you understood early and often that it was going to always center back to that. Always. The Knicks got hot, and they started out this game exceptionally well. With a 15-5 overall run, they had an 11-0 advantage at that point in points off of turnovers as well. They were beating the brakes off this Warriors team early on. Even with me saying that the Warriors won this in blowout fashion. Like, no, the Warriors were down like 31-14 at a point in this game in the very first quarter alone. But the Knicks, man, what has been haunting them over the course of this time is that defense. They have like one of the 3 or 4 worst overall in terms of defensive rating since New Year's Eve in the league entirely. And again, to be a team on championship caliber track, performing like that is just not acceptable for what they are trying to implement as a standard. In no way can you start off a game like that from their perspective and then give up a 21-7 run across essentially 6 minutes to the Warriors in this situation. Like, that can't happen. And they would eventually continue to battle back and take their first lead of the game in the second quarter, where it just continued overall. I'm going to say this now, and I'm going to stand on it and triple down on this shit, because I've already said it. Josh Hart is a player that obviously impacts winning as well. And in no way am I comparing the two directly, but in terms of overall style, in terms of what they can do as well-rounded players at the guard position, and in terms of how they just affect multiple aspects of the game overall. Brandon Podziemski is to the Warriors as Josh Hart is to the Knicks. Brandon Podziemski is the Warriors' Josh Hart. It is simple as that. I will stand on that for a while. Because, yes, the Warriors for a while, and everybody wants to talk about them needing an aggressive scorer. You honestly got that from Moses Moody, who would just be sparking up like crazy in this game. And you had Podziemski overall in the second quarter. Man, he was putting together some fucking shots. Between getting in some floaters, he hit a fucking buzzer-beating step back from the deep corner with the left-handed flick over Josh Hart, ironically enough, and he put together 10 points in this time. So it's not like he can't heat up when he wants to, and that has always been the issue for him in terms of consistency. That's been an issue with a lot of the Warriors' younger guards in terms of consistency. But Podziemski does everything so well. Like, he may not master it all in the same way that Josh Hart does also not really project to be a master at every single aspect of basketball there is. But he's a jack of all trades. Between what he can do on the boards as a Warrior point guard, what he can do in terms of getting out in space and creating opportunities for other players to convert on scoring drives. And also, the little details. The man still leads the NBA in drawn charges. And was able to draw one at a critical junction in this game to keep the foot on the gas pedal for the Warriors at this time. Like, he would put together a 19-point night with 5 rebounds, 2 assists, and 2 steals on 8 of 9 shooting with 2 threes. So it wasn't like he was just asked to constantly space out and shoot 3-pointers. No, he was genuinely taking people to the rack and getting buckets. He was hustling his ass off for boards to the point where they were contemplating giving this nigga a flagrant and a technical foul, and ended up doing neither for what would be a lane violation late in the game. That is stuff that you can't always teach, that you can't always put in the X's and O's. Like, no, he might not always be an aggressive scorer, but he can fit many different roles at one point of time. That you don't need to conform him or confine him into a specific space. So again, Podziemski is the Warriors version of Josh Hart. And a far younger version of him, or a shade of that kind of player. Because you gotta understand, Podziemski is still, to this point, just 22 years old, playing like this. Like, there's a reason why in a few of the different trades, he's been seen as an untouchable player for them. And those are the reasons why. Even if that process might not be particularly understood, even if you have a lot of big fish out there that you might need at the big man spot for the Warriors right now, and yes, they still desperately need one. He does a lot for this team. And it was not just him. You would have Stephen Curry find himself getting it going. He always is a Knicks killer. And he would put up his 9th straight game of 24 or more points against the Knicks with 27 on 4 of 9 shooting from deep. And also added 7 assists on the night. Jimmy Butler III as well had 32 points, 8 rebounds, and 4 assists on 14 of 22 shooting with a single 3-pointer. Ah, man. So it was all going right for the Warriors in this game. For the most part. There were lapses on their end, and there are things that you can take away from the Knicks' perspective. Later on in the fourth quarter, it was looking like the Warriors were just going to close it out completely. But they had to put Stephen Curry back in for a time to keep the Knicks at bay, because OG Anunoby was playing so damn angry. This man single-handedly, even when we got near clutch time, it wasn't exactly a clutch time game, but he was keeping them well within striking distance with 12 fourth quarter points of his own. He was just bullying people, barreling downhill with honestly just sheer strength. Even being able to get Draymond Green off platform at the time and just convert in the lane. Being able to take advantage of D'Anthony Melton not accounting for that specific lane control and just speeding right in for an easy dunk. Things like that were going to honestly help the Knicks if they had kept it going from the jump. But again, it wasn't consistent with them. Miles McBride also gave them good shooting with 25 points and 6 threes. However, overall for the Knicks, it did hurt them that one, they did not have Jalen Brunson or Mitchell Robinson in this game. They were both out with injury. So you can do with that what you will when looking at the overall outcome, but you still have to go out there and compete. And they did, only they fucked up tremendously. Because you still have Cat just being, at times, a liability. This man was in such deep foul trouble that they had no choice but to sub this man out just when they were trying to make a late push. That's how bad it was. He already had 5 fouls at this point in the game. And this is honestly despite him putting together a really solid performance on the boards. He had 17 points, and 20 rebounds on the night. So from that standpoint, he played fine. But when it came to getting stops on the defensive front, you could argue that a lot of the defensive struggles could center around his inability there. Like, they're expecting you at that point to do a lot better. Because it's not like these guys are just going right at Josh Hart or right at OG Anunoby or right at Mikal Bridges. No, they're attacking Karl Anthony Towns. And they are succeeding every time. Because he's not even in position to make plays at points. Or he's legitimately just doing whatever he can to hug and put his hands on people for no reason. No reason whatsoever. And then try to play it off or act like there was a call that needed to be made there. No, that's not the case. You're just overly doing too much. It's as simple as that. Then for the Knicks as well, for a time after the first quarter, they shot 2 of 17 from 3. And when you have the Warriors finding that kind of hot streak in a game, you can't respond to that with something that lackluster over the course of entire quarters. That can't happen. So that's what ended up hurting them overall. And they still did compete, as I said. It wasn't all bad for them. You just needed a lot more firepower in, again, consistency is the key. Always. But that'll do it for the game action that I watched in this time. There are other developments to get into, and to start it out, there was a report that mentioned that the Hawks, per Shams Charania, did trade Trae Young to the Wizards in exchange for CJ McCollum and Corey Kispert last week. I don't want to overstate anything that's already been said about it, because by this point, it's been covered extensively. But there are so many different avenues to look at this from, to where one could make the argument that, depending on how you frame it, neither team really won the deal or lost the deal. It's generally a sad ending to something with this Hawks team that honestly, just a few years ago, showed so much promise. You understand it. Just under 5 years ago, this man Trae Young was lining it up in the Eastern Conference Finals and taking the Bucks damn near to the brink, at least giving them a run for their money. That's how it was for the Hawks in that time. But, as it has gone with Trae Young throughout the rest of his time there, they've taken a step back year to year offensively in terms of overall rating with him on the court. And this season, it just culminated in just absolute... It was astronomically bad. The splits between him being on the court and off the court with this team, and when it came to their overall record, when it came to their overall performance, especially when it came to defensive rating, were so different in completely different tiers. Like, if you remove the context, if you remove the names and you just put those numbers out, you wouldn't even be able to tell at that point that it was Trae Young leading this team as they went on to do that. But it's how the changing of the times has been. Like, Jalen Johnson has ascended, as we've consistently said, into a legitimate all-around player for this Hawks team. And he can be a true point forward for the squad. So if that, stands to be the case from that perspective, it does result in a win for the Hawks to move forward, make him the focal point of their team, and center their entire structure around him as a two-way player. And that is where these teams overall in the league that consistently contend are trending towards. Bit of a different scenario, but when you look at teams like the Celtics, for example, you have multiple two-way players at your disposal in Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, and you saw how far they were able to get. The Hawks are trying to build something similar with both Dyson Daniels and Jalen Johnson. Now, Trae Young, with his liabilities, had no room to fit in that kind of structure overall. And so, from that standpoint, they felt that he had to go. It was always a foregone conclusion. And even with me, I don't want to be that way, but I'll toot my own horn a little bit. I was thinking about it, because you hear these conversations the entire time about something potentially going down with them trading Trae Young, and it's like, okay, are they actually considering this? Because you have Jalen Johnson performing like this season, you have Dyson Daniels doing this season, and you have the Hawks overall with those two guys leading the way, specifically when they're both on the floor. They're performing at a much higher rate than they were with Trae Young. So the question had to be asked, and the Hawks were willing to answer it with a pretty damning result. It is unfortunate for them in this situation, because you have to look at it from this perspective. Also, whenever you are trading your franchise guy, it is an admission that, in a way, you didn't entirely fail. You didn't miss on the Trae Young pick. By all means, he's a very good player. There's no denying that. And he's going to bring a good amount of value to this Washington team, which we'll get into in a second. But you're trading a franchise talent away. You're admitting that specific run is, by and large, over. It is past, and you are moving in a completely different direction. In those situations, you want to be able to get as much of a return as you possibly can for that talent. Because that, at a time, was viewed as your best player. However, that would not be the case in a one-to-one kind of perfectionist idea for this specific situation. Because, as they've constantly been talking about as well over this time, with that kind of performance being taken into account, his stock has fallen and been on a consistent decline for the longest time now, to where his only preference was Washington. And I personally don't think that was by choice. I don't think that was by choice at all for him. Like, you're looking at how the rest of the league is constructed, and yes, there are teams that need point guards who can do what Trae Young does well, but the liabilities and the cons that come with picking him up for those teams far exceed the positives that he can provide to a roster, to where no one else was really calling the Hawks back to even entertain their specific offers for him. And so Washington was literally the last team standing. And you know what kind of message that sends? The fact that you're essentially the Hawks getting, by all accounts, a bad return in CJ McCollum and Corey Kispert for Trae Young. That's how badly they wanted him gone, to where they were okay with getting next to nothing back for him. And from that standpoint, you could say that they kind of lost this. In the grand scheme of things, maybe not, but for this kind of trade specifically to go down, and again, it's not like CJ McCollum is a bad player. It's not like Corey Kispert is a bad player. But Kispert in Washington was barely playing and is going to find himself in the same situation on Atlanta. Meanwhile, CJ McCollum is just going to be filling a bridge. He's not a long-term solution, and you will still have a hole at point guard, at a true point guard, for a little bit. The thing that the Hawks have, though, they have the capital. And they can thank the Pelicans for granting them a top 3 pick next season. So, depending on who comes out at that specific selection, if they're looking for a guard, Darren Peterson of Kansas might be their guy. I don't know if he projects to be a true point guard, but if anything, again, they have a path forward, at least. So, maybe the Hawks were okay with getting the bad end of the short end of the stick here. But yeah, it's just, oh man. Like, this is a guy, like, literally being named in all these rap songs. Ice Trade a motherfucking game. Right. Simple as that. And that guy, who was on top with this team for that long, not even that long ago, is now out entirely of this roster. It's tough. But again, it shows where, things could be headed. Like, again, Johnson, you look at him, he's a two-way player. He has these overall abilities and is versatile. Something that you can't really say about Trae Young. And a lot of that could also deal with the fact that Jalen Johnson stands at like 6'8". So, you're looking for taller point guards on a year-to-year basis. And it's like, yeah, there's still room to have guys come through that are a bit shorter than that. But the window for them to be starting caliber players may be dwindling a little bit. And that's not just a Trae Young thing. That's a fundamental idea across the league that is being taken into consideration here. Trae Young may just happen to be the latest victim in this regard. But he is a player who, when healthy, can help Washington. And put an emphasis on when healthy. Because, since that report last week, McCollum's actually appeared in a few games for the Hawks. He played in the very first game after joining the team. And possibly getting some work done for, medical evaluations and things like that. That's always the normal process to have in this scenario. Corey Kispert also, while not playing much, has appeared in at least a few games here. Meanwhile, Trae Young is still tending to said injury and has yet to appear and will have to wait for a little more time to come back onto the court. So that's already not looking great for the Wizards in this scenario. But there are a couple positives to take away from this before I can move on to the next piece of news here. It does give them what they've been needing. They need a guy who can spur and lead an entire offense. Even if you have the defensive liability taken into account for Trae Young, the Wizards have a ton of good defenders surrounding him. You have Bilal Coulibaly. You have Keyshawn George emerging as a somewhat two-way threat himself, unexpectedly. And then Alex Zaw, in theory, has been holding it down well enough to last and be considered a quality player at the center position. So you have defenders upon defenders flanking Trae Young on both sides. That won't be too much of a problem for them to, hash out and potentially mask him on defense. Although, still, you're going to have those teams pick on him. It's very easy to. I will admit. But offensively, none of those guys can... I won't say that none of those guys can. Like, even when you look at guys off the bench like Trey Johnson III and Bub Carrington, I think Bub Carrington at times has been able to be a player who can create his own shot. But in terms of the starters, you largely don't have that. And it just makes for a clinky offensive system. Now, with having Trae Young run the show, it could be smoother in that regard. So that's something to take away from it. And also, there's a connection there with Travis Schlenk, a man holding a front office position who actually, when they were back in Atlanta, he was the guy that engineered the draft day trade that sent him to the Hawks in the first place. Was the first guy to truly give him a shot in the league. So you could imagine that having him back there again for the lull, as tough as that is, you could manage to build a quality system around him with that man. Having an understanding of all the strengths and weaknesses that he has in his game. And being able to parlay that into a roster that will help him succeed in the best possible way. So, again, whenever he suits up, it'll be interesting to see how it goes. But again, the fact that he's already missing substantial time with this injury to start out his tenure there, it's not a good first impression. For this next development here, is also mentioned by Shams Charania. Per multiple reports that instantly, Anthony Davis would be out with a ligament tear in his hand. And at that point, the initial report was that if he needed surgery on it, he was going to miss several months. That would be confirmed in a follow-up by Shams Charania later on. So he's going to be out for the next few months on end. And there were multiple teams around the NBA trying to engage in trade talks for him. The Warriors were rumored to do so for some reason. And again, it's not that Anthony Davis is a bad player. He's still a quality center. But you, at a point of time, have to look at this in terms of the injury history, in terms of the contract that he commands, and in terms of the age, and truly reconsider investing so much into the man. Like, it's unfortunate that he is out for this much time. You wish him nothing but the best and hope that he can recover fully from this. But if you were a team pursuing a center and you're seeing him endure something like this again, why would that suggest to you that it would make optimal sense for you as a franchise to move forward with him as your center? It doesn't make sense. So from that standpoint, it puts those teams, on ice for, having to look for some other candidates here to fill those holes at the center position. Because, that is literally not worth it. He's not even going to be playing for the rest of the season, it looks like. Let alone miss several months. And you were willing to take a chance, potentially make some risque moves just to get him? I'm not sure if it was worth all of that. But okay. As for the Mavericks, it'll give Gafford more room in theory to be the main guy. But man, it just is yet another situation for them where injuries are just hindering their ability to really make much of anything happen in the season. They have, again, started to get Cooper Flag to turn it around. But between this and already having Derek Lively II be out for the season with injury, you are severely, and I mean severely undermanned at the center position. Nobody wants to see Dwight Powell on the court for this team, even though it feels like that is what's going to have to happen. And as I'm checking this out, it looks as though Daniel Gafford is injured too, leaving them no choice. So again, severely undermanned. And it sucks that, they've been on the road back. They're trying to get some good momentum working for them, and they are having these kinds of setbacks. It feels like they themselves, now ironically enough, after trying to move on from Anthony Davis, you're kind of stuck with that. You can't move a player while he's injured in the NBA, I don't believe. And man, until he is healthy again, even when he is, them seeing this around the league on the injury report, how much do you think that's going to tank the man's value when it already has been to an extent? It just makes things absolutely worse from that standpoint. So again, you hope AD gets better, but man, it gives other teams a chance to just truly reconsider looking into him as a center and maybe considering another direction to take. Because man, that's what you're going to have to ask yourself. Is it truly worth it to take that much out of your own organization in a potential trade? Depending on how much they think Anthony Davis is worth, you're willing to put all of that on the line for a man who is that much of a risk of consistent injury. I would not believe that teams would find that to be worth it at all. And then for a piece of quick news here, and something pretty commendable, honestly, the Hornets recently would announce that they would retire Dell Curry's jersey in March. I believe it is around mid-March for the Hornets. And I definitely respect that. You got people saying, Steph Curry's so damn good. His father's jersey retired and things like that. Look, hey, there's a lot of significance that comes with that. I don't think there's an issue with that at all. They just recently became the family with the most combined games of play in NBA history, if I'm not mistaken. So that is already something that can't be taken away from them. And I'm not saying that you're gonna have every single Curry get their jersey hung in the rafters. But what I am saying is that, damn, from one generation to the next, is there a problem with showing that kind of respect? I don't think so. Dell Curry, again, was a consistent player. If nothing else, if nothing more, for the Hornets. And at that time, they're one of the expansion teams at that point, they were looking for star talent. And while Curry himself, Dell Curry, might never have been that, again, he was one of those players at that time. Yeah, everybody wants to talk about Mahmoud Abdul Rahim, rather, and guys like that. Dude, this man was going at the same time. Mahmoud Abdul Rauf. Oh my gosh, what the hell? What am I talking about? I am mixing that up completely. But yeah, no. Like, Dell Curry was at the center of this shift just as much. So, if anything, for a Hornets organization that honestly has not seen much across their entire time, it's going to be fairly easy. You know, when looking at the top crop of players that have come through that organization to, you know, make decisions on whose jersey number to retire or not. And with Dell Curry being, by default, one of the better players in that franchise's history, it's only right that he gets his jersey retired. I mean, across 10 seasons, he had his best overall output in his career, by far. You know, standard player with 14 points and straight up getting 46% shooting from the field, 40.5% shooting from deep consistently across his 701 games in the organization. And I think with him specifically, you can't discredit what he was able to do with the team. You know, it might not be that great of a team, all things considered. But he, for what he meant to that organization, was valuable enough. And so, again, in the same way where I was talking about in the NFL with them potentially needing to have Adam Thielen get his jersey hung in the Raptors for the Vikings. It's kind of the same thing here. You know how much he meant to that organization. There is no reason why you should deny him an opportunity to get his jersey retired if he can get it. And it's not like they did this in the first few years after he left the organization. This is something that has been brewing for a while. They've been taking time with this. And, I mean, hell, if it comes, you know, in, I guess, alignment with what Stephen Curry's been able to do, again, there's no issue with that whatsoever. It still allows him to be recognized for the value that he had on this team. A team that, again, didn't offer all that much. You have to understand. So it's just, that's pretty cool to see, though. But that'll do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.